Of all the horrors in the lands between, there was no greater evil than that found within the walls of Volcano Manor. An inquisition of bloodshed had sprang from ambitions that many had once deemed worthy of a great leader, but their lord whom they once followed had become a monstrosity unlike any that had ever existed before. The reviled and hideous Praetor Rykard, Lord of Blasphemy. Rykard was the eldest son born to Radigan and Renala. In the days before the Shattering, when the lands between was governed by the Golden Order, Rykard had been a captivating presence. His followers had been drawn to him by his grand ambitions and his defiant attitude. His disinterest in the rigid fundamentalism of the Golden Order was appealing to those who were critical of it. Rykard had a taste for exploration, and it was during his travels to lands afar that he met and fell in love with a dancer named Tanith. She had enchanted him not with physical appeal, but through her dignified beauty, and Rykard soon pursued her in marriage. His travels would later take him to the base of Mount Gelmir, a dormant volcano in the west of the Atlas Plateau. It was in this desiccated land that he discovered the ancient hexes that had been conceived there when the volcano was host to fanatics of a heretical religion long since forgotten. As were all the children from Renala's lineage, Rykard was a powerful sorcerer and sought to harness the power of Mount Gelmir's magma into a new and practical sorcery. It was here that he decided to set roots and built a vast castle, as threatening in appearance as the volcano on which it was built. He named himself Lord of Volcano Manor, and Tanith its lady. In the preceding days of the Night of the Black Knives, Rykard had served an instrumental role alongside his sister, Ranni, in preparations that would enable her to steal the Rune of Death. They had both disparaged the meddling of the Two Fingers and their prattle of a predestined fate. Ranni was successful in her plot, and gifted Rykard a knife that contained traces of the Rune of Death, should he ever have to face Malekith, the wielder of the Black Blade that contained the power to kill him. Rykard's blasphemous actions against the Golden Order had earned him the support of many who questioned their own faith in it. His public denunciation of the Greater Will made him seem like a fearless leader, one worth fighting for. But Rykard wasn't a respected warrior like his brother, Radahn. He didn't have the tales of conquest to earn him the admiration given to a great hero. He took his power by force, and began a bloody persecution against any that clung to the Golden Order in the Erd Tree. Though he was lord of the manor, Rykard had never truly been the one in charge. When he had arrived at Mount Gelmir, he had found something that would inevitably be the end of him, something that would lead to a putrid field of death and a reign of terror and bloodshed, far beyond anything that had ever been seen before. Beneath the volcano lived an ancient deity in which true evil resided. The immortal being was called Aglay, a horrific serpent that demanded blood through sacrifice. Rykard had been charmed by it, just as he had been mesmerized by Tanith long ago. Rykard's manor had been built as a monstrous tribute, a place where the lost heretical religion of Mount Gelmir could thrive once again. But Aglay was a deity that demanded sacrifice, and the act of worship was not done in churches, but done through bloodshed. Volcano Manor had become the site of an appalling inquisition. The mass murder and torture of countless victims fed the bloodlust of the serpent deity. The killings were done indiscriminately, and many nobles died within the walls of the horrific dungeon. But Rykard's devotion to his god could never satiate him, and the gluttonous pursuit of blood only grew larger. The prisons of the manor could no longer hold all of the victims, and the manor was expanded with only bloodshed in mind. Aglay had once promised Rykard immortality. All he had to do was offer himself to the serpent, body and all. He would take a new life, in which he could grow stronger and live eternally without the fear that death would one day come for him. In his lust for that unattainable power, he fed himself to the serpent, and all ambitions he once had were no more. But for Rykard's men, this was beyond the pale. Once loyal because they believed him to be a leader with ambitions that defied even the Greater Will, they now only saw a horrific monstrosity with an insatiable lust for bloodshed and depravity. Like all others surrounding him, the Gelmir knights turned their backs on Rykard. It was only Tanith that remained, and never before had she been more enamored than the moment he fed himself to the serpent. Rykard's blasphemous campaign against the Golden Order was an unforgivable sin. The royal capital of Lindell sent an army to quash him and snuff out the Lord of Volcano Manor. But even though his knights had turned their backs on him, Rykard was not without an army. The Lindell soldiers were no match for the unspeakable horrors that met them on the battlegrounds of Mount Gelmir. Rykard had created machines perfected for mass murder, iron virgins that had been fashioned in the very likeness of Tanith. The Lindell soldiers were assaulted and killed in droves, and Rykard's victories were put on a gruesome, sadistic display. It was the most atrocious battle in the entirety of the Shattering. The Lindell soldiers that survived were left outnumbered and unprepared for the barren battlefield. In a display of utter hopelessness, they turned to cannibalism when they could no longer bear the pain of starvation. Rykard and Tanith resolved to kill any Tarnished that had the markings of one who might become a great ruler. Under their watch, no Tarnished would ever rise to Elden Lord, and they would assassinate any that bore the likeness of a hero. They lured fallen Tarnished to the manor, under the guise of sanctuary among other recusants, those who had turned against grace and the greater will. But in a monstrous design like everything else within the manor, they used the Tarnished to hunt their own kind, and ensured that any who might have been a candidate to become Elden Lord were killed. Although Rykard had been forsaken by his knights, he had not been forgotten by them. The men who once served him now sought a way to kill him, and in their search found a weapon that was fashioned long ago to hunt the immortal serpent of Mount Gelmir. But though they tried to kill him, they failed. Rykard had become too powerful. It was a task that only the worthy Tarnished could complete, and in confronting the horror beneath the grounds of the manor, was Rykard then slain and run through, thus ending the most vile legacy that had ever been born. Lady Tanith, who had been ever joined to her beloved lord, and even more so after he became one with the serpent, would spend her days devouring his remains, in a deranged act of eternal devotion to him. For Tanith and the deformed man-serpents born from Rykard's terrible union, Volcano Manor would always be their home, stained with blood. But for the rest of the lands between, there could only be hope that the gruesome manor once responsible for the deaths of so many would one day be engulfed by the volcano, and that the elder serpent that once devoured a demigod would never be resurrected again.